And we're live. And welcome to another edition of Life is People. Well, tonight it's my great honour and pleasure to have Mukul Shah on tonight from the Jain Young Jains really. Before we go any further, before we start this whole conversation, Mukul, you're going to start with a little prayer just to sort of just have a pre this conversation. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Namo Arihantanam Namo Siddhanam Namo Ayarihanam Namo Ganzanam Namo Loye Savasa Eso Panchanamo Karo Savapavapana Sano Mangalancha Savesan Padamam Havai Mangalam Namo Antanam Namo Siddhanam Namo Ayariyanam Namo Vanzayanam Namo Loye Savasahunam Eso Panch Namukano Savapava Panasano Mangalancha Savesim Padamam Havai Mangalam Kamemi Savajive Save Jiva Kamantu Me Miti Me Sava Bhuesu Veram Majam Nakenai Veram Majam Nakenai. All right. Hello.
Well, that was for someone who can't understand the language and maybe doesn't understand the words. I can maybe understand the sentiment of the thoughts there. I mean, before we go any further, I mean, it's up to you, and if you feel free to answer this question. What was the sentiment of the words you were just speaking upon there?
So the first one was our main Jain prayer called the Navkar Mantra. The sentiment, in a sense, it's an eternal prayer, and it talks about praying to great people, not by name but by qualities. The whole thing has a lot of depth, but to take one example, the word Namo means to bow down, and Arihant, Ari is enemy, and Hunt is to destroy. So that might seem a bit of a contradiction if you're talking about non-violence. How do you talk about someone who destroyed the enemies? But it's talking about the inner enemies: anger, greed, ego, deceit, jealousy, lust, and someone who's overcome all of this, because the greatest enemy is within, rather than external, and it's believed external enemies are manifestations of our internal enemies. So that's just one example. And the whole prayer goes into detail about the personalities, the types of people that we bow down to and aspire to become like. The second part, the last part, is talking about Kame Misabajiva, means may I forgive all souls, may all souls forgive me. My enmity is nobody, is with no one, and friendship extends to all. And I guess what that's trying to say is about if you have friendship with everyone, but you're hating someone or you're hating something for some reason, then that's going to end your peace of mind. Even one person or one place somewhere in the corner of your mind, if that's eating away at you, then no matter how much peaceful you might be towards everyone else, that little feeling is going to eat away at your happiness, eat away, eat away, eat away. And so it's saying that it's not just that complete non-violence. If you have a fire somewhere in you, at some point it can spread, and the embers can spread. So it's a little forgiveness prayer that we often say as Jains. So that what that means.
Well, fantastic. And one of the, I think the starting points about where I really wanted to start this whole conversation with, because I'd imagine many people, particularly if they're brought up in our part of the world, maybe have had vague passing bys of what Jainism is, or they've maybe heard of what it is and stuff. But I mean, all I can sort of say from a data perspective, you won't generally find a Jain in the military or anyone any harmful, because they're the most. And I think this is almost without any kind of argument or logic. They're the most peaceful people I've ever met in my life. And I mean, fortunately, after I was saying before we went live, I went over to India and I met some Jains over there, and it's the whole philosophy starts from. So that's kind of my, an overview from my angle. So it really begs the first question to you, and I think it's a really good place to start this whole conversation with you. Maybe it's a two-parted one. What is Jainism? And maybe before that, just a preempted. Where did this all, where did this all begin? Did it begin? I know obviously in India, but when did it begin? How old is this? Does the philosophy go back?
So from the point of view of Jains, we believe it's an eternal religion. In its current form, in terms of historical references, Mahavira Bhagwan was a contemporary of Gautam Buddha, who founded Buddhism. But Jainism goes back way before Mahavira Bhagwan. There's references before that to 24 such forward bearers like Mahavira Bhagwan, and our scriptures go back millions of years, and sort of, so to give an example, our first founder in this time cycle was called Adinath Bhagwan or Rishabdev, and that is depending on, from what I've read in other faiths and the Bible and other things, I found a lot of comparison between the times of Adam and Eve and sort of some of the descriptions. Obviously, that is more my my own interpretations rather than sort of what I don't have enough knowledge to know. But certainly our historical references go back to the very beginning of time. Well, we don't believe there is a beginning of time, but that's it's quite technical and probably a bit deep. But yeah.
Well, okay. I mean, the sort of the foundations, again, from my understanding, and again, pronunciation and words, but there's 24 enlightened beings, and again, I don't want to sort of stumble over these words. Let's start with the very basics. What was the name of the 24 that up till now? I mean, what's that? Yeah. What is the name of those enlightened beings called? Is it Tandrahukas or something? Sorry.
Tirthankaras.
Tirthankaras.
I mean, from the prayer we mentioned, Namo, that prayer Arihantanam. Arihant is also another word, beings who have conquered their inner enemies, primarily who have not only trodden the path but have shown the path. So almost like a sort of leader, a forward bearer. That's the belief.
Exactly. Now, what I found, and I think one of kind of unique, in an essence of the philosophy you talk about, is the idea that wisdom is inherent, and you can almost gain enlightenment, for want of a better word, through wisdom alone. There is no mediation. There is no, that can be gained in a moment. Now, one of the inherent philosophies, or again, is the concept of jiva, which is the things that you are yourself, and that karma and the things attract to you. And this is the whole point of trying to maybe use the analogy of like how I, for want of better words, how I'm going to describe it, but it's kind of like this body that I live in is a house. The people living inside it are my thoughts, and the anger, all the things that maybe rise inside me, desires, happiness, all these things. They're the people inside it. And the karma is like the dust that comes in. So I always, and so how do I stop that coming in so I can clear things and see things properly? Is to shut the windows, and that is the idea of trying to just shut off some of the distractions, which is I think it's very common with Buddhism. We discussed this in private, how there's a lot of similarities to Buddhism in that essence. Now, this concept of, how would you say this is a particular? I mean, hopefully my analogy is hopefully give a kind of a rough overview. But what would you say is particularly, what is the core principles of Jainism that separates itself maybe from what people may understand about Hinduism or Buddhism? What's the very concept of the uniqueness of Jainism?
So you're right. I mean, there's a lot of similarities with Buddhism. The whole concept of reincarnation, karma, about conquering your inner enemies, that the whole fire is within, and that also, there's a lot, I mean, within Hinduism, there's a lot of aspects in Hinduism. The whole concept is that there's a cycle of life, death, and rebirth, and that our karmas, essentially, that the universe is fair, and if you do good, it will be rewarded. If you do bad, it will be rewarded. Mind, speech, and action, and that stretches back not only in this life but thousands, millions of lifetimes before. It provides, I mean, it goes very, very deep. And personally, I've done, obviously I'm a scientist by background, I'm a doctor, I'm a medic, and I've analyzed a lot of things scientifically. And obviously a lot of people believe this about their own faith, I guess. But for me, I found a lot of parallels, and it's not just, there's a lot of deep thought and description in a lot of the philosophies, but they talk about reincarnation, karma, escaping the cycle of life, death, rebirth, and doing it through peace, and equality. So I guess not just humans, but animals, insects, plants. It's ahimsa, so non-violence is a key principle, but not just non-violence as in being absolutist, or absolutism could also be considered a form of violence. So, I mean, if you look at a lot of the wars in the world today, they do occur because of absolutism. So that leads on to the second main principle of Jainism, which is anekantavada, which is the theory of multifacetedness. I mean, the famous parable, which is also common to Buddhism, is given about the 6 blind men and the elephant, which a lot of people have heard. And each blind man sees a different part of the elephant and argues that he's right. Sorry, that was my phone slipping. That he's right. But they're all right and they're all wrong. But by appreciating the whole picture, they avoid a war. So that's the second big principle that supports non-violence, ahimsa. And aparigraha is a third A, if you like, in simple terms, if you're thinking about the main principles, which is non-possessiveness. A good way to illustrate that that I found is through actually a parable that I heard from the Sufi faith, but it helped me think about aparigraha and the absence of desire. That goes that there's a king, and he meets a saint, and the saint he's full of wealth, and the saint says there's a lot of people around, and so let's give a penny to the poorest man here. And straight away the people give a penny to the king. The king had come for advice on how to wage a war and get more land and more kingdom. So the king said, how am I poor? I've got a whole kingdom. And he said, your poverty is determined not by what you have, but what you still want and what you still need. So you are, in fact, the poorest man here, whereas perhaps some of the poorest people may well actually be some of the most well off if they're satisfied. So your poverty is the difference between what you have and what you still desire. So if your desires go, then you automatically become the wealthiest one there. And the principle of Parigra is exactly that, to the extent that, you know, our saints take this to a much higher level, and hence shutting out more of the external world, they develop the stillness within, which leads them to more of the ultimate happiness, not just in some faraway place of liberation or moksha, but even attaining a degree of the happiness in this very life. So those three, if you want to think about the core principles, those three A's is a good way to start looking at it, I'd say. Although it's a lot more depth, it's also very simple.
Well, yeah, and just on a sort of quick sort of side tangent to all those things, I think the more that we in our part of the world, and we as a species, for want of a better word, that we're understanding science, as you were speaking upon, we're understanding a lot more. I mean, I remember 10, 15 years ago having debates with people back then saying, well, do you know that plants communicate? And it was like, oh, of course they can, and it was all a joke. But now, as science has progressed, as you know, and as that has happened, we're understanding on a daily basis. Not only can plants communicate, and that's now almost standard knowledge kind of thing, but they understand that, you know, the plants are having feelings, and that, you know, so it's, what I'm trying to say is, the more we're understanding of things, the more you realize that some of these the philosophies you're speaking upon, however old they may be, are absolutely relevant to today's complete where we are now. They're like, it's just like, this is so true. You know, if we did, and how much harm, which leads into the second point, is because of this ignorance in a wider society that has led to industrial farming, slaughtering of animals, that's led to humans becoming ill and sick. So if you just took these principles out into everyday life, which people can do on a one-to-one level, it would change things dramatically. Like you said, not in some sort of a utopia, you know, many years down the line, but just in a day-to-day level, and how we could all change this level and society around us just by simple. This is what I wanted you to speak upon, because you're not saying to people like, that's what I love about particularly the Jain philosophy. It's not kind of like, well, if you give up now and in some future life you're going to have kingdoms in the sky. It's like, no, you can make this practical now, and this implement this now and change, make this beautiful, this rock that we're spinning on, this beautiful golden blue shiny example of life. Let's make this a really nice place to live in. And, you know, people like Mahatma Gandhi's, and this is the same principles that, and it can change things, and we've seen that, you know. So that's why I really want to speak about it. That's why I want to go down that sidetrack because you mentioned about you being a doctor, but I think it's just so relevant about what you were just saying about this isn't some dreamy kind of utopian thing. It's about how we can really shift culture and day-to-day things, and we can see that's what I'm saying, we can see the illnesses and the sicknesses have been caused by straying away from these core, as I would say, and you probably have another word for it, but the core human, what they're inside of us. I think it's internally we all know we shouldn't harm. To me it's, if you call it Jainism or you want to call it something else, to me it's something that's, it's like you said, it's almost universal inside us. It's the imbalance that leads to the greatest sicknesses that I would say most people generally don't like.
Yeah, I'm talking about from the medical profession. I mean, depression is so prevalent, anxiety is so prevalent, and the whole principles of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, are all about sort of your form of thinking. In every area and subject, I mean, Jainism's gone deep into this area about forms of thinking and how one part of thinking leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And there's names for all of these as well, and some of these principles applied can help. I mean, suicide or harming others is an extreme form of a disordered thought which hasn't been eliminated at its root or at its core. Yeah, there's a lot in the philosophy that applies to a lot of modern life.
Yeah, and this is the I think it's something you just spoken on there is very true, and we've spoken about this before in private, but it's very relevant if anyone listens to this podcast. I mean, male suicide is something I like to speak about a lot because I think it's something that's not spoken a lot in this country, and I think anything that can cure this, other than just putting people onto pills and just making them into those kind of zombie type people. So, and this is one of the bridges I wanted to gap, and this is why I think these conversations are really relevant because people, and I speak real, I can only reflect what it's how it is, but a lot of people may be put off by names, and they see, and it's for someone who's grown up in the culture, and they start seeing Jainism, and they start seeing just differences, and they think, oh, okay. So that's what I'm trying to say. I want to break this down. So for instance, maybe people listen to this, who may be sort of feeling, or then their mindset of they're depressed and stuff like that. What advice would you give to people like that? Let's say there's some, particularly a male. We're two men here discussing, and what steps and advice would you say to them to sort of you feel could help them along the way, or
So I mean, from both points of view, really. I mean, one of the things about uh, anxiety, depression, negative cycles of thinking. So in Jainism, we have a name called Artha Dhyan, which means mournful meditation. So as you have positive meditations, you have negative meditations, which which progress. And one of the issues and one of the reasons we hold on to these thoughts is from a philosophical point of view, we always will look for something or someone to blame for our situations, whether it's people have done this, people have done that, this situation's done this, and that removes our power, our control over the process. And looking at it from a philosophical point of view, the whole thing about karma, a lot of people are uncomfortable with because of the whole, does that mean I'm not in control of my fate? Is it destiny? Is it fate? But one of these things about these philosophies is it puts the responsibility back on to us, not in a negative way, but in a way that 3/4 of the battle is acceptance. And I think once it's in your hands, then automatically you feel a lot better about any situation, because no matter how much your back up is against the wall, you can have that feeling that whatever the situation, this is my starting point. I have the power to climb out of this well, this wall, wherever I am. And that ownership can only come from acceptance. And while we keep blaming others, we'll never get that acceptance, you know. It's difficult to obviously sometimes talk about some of these things in a professional capacity, because you know, as a professional, you can't promote any one faith or anything. You have to, everything has to be general. But from a personal point of view, uh, you know, in the professional sense, I would focus on the thought processes, which is scientifically proven through CBT, which talks about exactly those things in different ways, and changing the cycle from a negative to a positive cycle of thinking.
Exactly, and I think this is the core of what we do, you know, this whole discussion really, because I think one of the most inspiring things to me about the whole philosophy and the whole core. Again, I've got very little understanding, so I'm just coming to it from a complete perspective. But it's the core of the, like you've just spoken upon. Then this is all self-generated. You know what I mean? And that's what I think is really refreshing in a world when we're surrounded by echo chambers and people shouting at you this and the salvation's this and salvation's all one way. And it's not like you said, it's all internal, because all this internal. But the difficult thing is, and as you know, that's what I think really speaks upon it. And you kind of, you know, speaking upon before we went down this tangent, but that is the grind of life, isn't it? We've all got to, we're all attached to things. I think, you know, like you're saying, then relating to suicide. I mean, ownership of it is really hard, because it's easy to do that. That's one of the things that's one of the battles. It's very, what you've spoken about. It's very easy to say in some ways, but a lot of people, they really suffer with that, because it's easy to blame everybody else, and like you say, the real empowerment comes from ownership of it all, and which is what I love about the whole. About what the core philosophy and what Jainism stands for, because it is that whole idea of this is the greatest thing we've ever been given, and we can clear ourselves, and we haven't got to, because that is such an empowerment. I mean, much as we're talking about some of the negative aspects now, it can overcome those negative aspects. The other side is so empowering. I mean, I was speaking to you before. I mean, this is one of the things I think where it's the opposite side of it, but I think it's really relevant to say. I mean, I was giving you a fact that I checked you before we went live, but Jains make up 0.2% of India, but contribute 25% of the GDP. Now that's incredible positivity of what you can do to the mind, and what you can do to yourself if you just take some of the thought processes on. But that's what I'm saying. So it's trying to get these. Like anything else, I think it's trying to break down the complications. That's why I want to have this conversation about. Trying to take some of the big complicated, you know, the words, and let's break it down to the fundamental points. Because so you were discussing before we went down that tangent. You were discussing about karma and stuff like that, and I think most people have an understanding about karma. But what is it about? What is it that we can do? So, for instance, why would a Jain, for instance, think, okay, for karma reasons, I'm not going to eat, and I'm going to become a vegetarian rather than eat meat? I mean, what's the difference? And I'll put a counter argument. What if someone says to you, well, hey, nature's all about, you know, red in claw and tooth, and hey, it's just, you know, that animal falls. What are you going to do with it? Nature's going to eat it up. Why would I not want to partake in something that nature's given it? If you're going to argue that nature's given me a fruit and a nut, couldn't you argue that a sheep has fallen in the? So why would you? Why Jains? Why would, particularly if you meet all Jains, like I said at the beginning, they're never going to meet a Jain in the army, and you're always going to meet, most Jains are going to be vegetarians. Why? These are the questions. Why particularly is this related to karma about not eating animals compared to, like I say, eating an animal that's died?
So, I mean, with the Jain philosophy, I mean, I guess one of the things is eating an animal that's died. It still creates an attraction for the meat. It still creates. A lot of us are slaves to our taste buds. What's to say that you eat an animal that's died, and then you won't kill an animal for that taste? I mean, in our ancient stories, there's a lot of examples of, you know, a step in a certain direction and how that progresses and that proceeds. Another sort of part of that is that while the animal may have died, as a philosophy, that that the thoughts that have gone through that animal in the last moment, I mean, it's very unlikely that it's going to have just died. And how do you know the animal's just died? And particularly those fear, anger, all those thoughts that have been in that animal, while those thoughts aren't still there, a lot of those vibrations, we believe, will be carried. Now, you might say that, look, if there's life in plants and there's life in things, what's the difference? And there's a famous story just about this philosophical point where someone said, look, if I kill one elephant, then that'll feed maybe, I don't know, for 50 days, and that saves killing 50 plants or 100 plants. So isn't that less violent? So the answer to that philosophical point, or that debate, again, comes to the point of, through five senses, the extent of pain, suffering you feel is that much greater, much greater compared to the plants. But also, to get to the stage of being a five-sensed animal, in Jainism, it's believed that that is a much more evolved state, and someone's got there and you're just cutting them down and slaughtering them. It's believed for the journey of that soul, that's a lot more harmful. That goes into a lot of our philosophy. I mean, obviously the ideal would be to not harm anything. And if you look at the life of some of our saints, how they live and what they do do that to the maximum of their ability, to the extent that they don't even cook their own food. They sort of take a little bit from each place, like a bee would take a little bit of nectar from each plant. One is cooking extra for them, so that they're not directly responsible for any deaths because of what they want, because they're just taking what was from there. But that's another point. But on the point of the animals, that's essentially how I'd answer it.
Yeah, I mean,
Does that make
I think it's this. Yeah, it does, my friend, and this begs another question, which I know we're going to go down maybe in other conversations, but just generally on that point there. I mean, I think this is. I mean, this is a really general big question, but you're right. I mean, like I said, I mean, the strictest participants in Jainism will literally cover their mouths, stop to breathe any insects. They will literally brush the streets in front of them. I mean, it's very. But how do you do this with the fact that we've got a, you're living in London. How do we we can't. So these are the general, really philosophical, deeper
Yeah.
questions, and stuff like, because I mean, at some point in life, that's what I'm saying. I mean, everybody's going to get in a car, and you just by generality, you're going to hit a fly and stuff like that, and you may not want to. So how do you? This is what I'm saying.
How do
So
you marry the two? Yeah.
exactly this, which I think goes back to. So, for instance, if you have to live in the world that's been constructed for us right now, and getting in cars and taxis and stuff like that, but you have for instance, someone like you. I mean, how do you? For instance, knowing, okay, in my daily travels, I may have, done all this, not intentionally. I haven't gone out and I didn't get on that bus to go out and kill loads of flies and stuff like this. But so, what is it in your practice that you will do to like you say, to rid that sand out of the house, to get rid of that, how do you do this on a daily basis? What is your practice?
So, I mean, one of the key things I'd say about Jainism, which is a misconception a lot of people have, is it's absolutely, while it's strict, it's also probably one of the most flexible and non-absolutist type of faith. So it says this is the ideal, obviously, but the key thing is this is the ideal in mind, speech, and action. So what a lot of people sometimes do is they look at the action, but not always the mind and the speech. And that's sometimes where sometimes a faith can be judged on its followers. And if all the followers perhaps practicing things in one way and not another, then it's the fault of the followers rather than the faith. And with Jainism, I'd say that the mind, speech, action is a key element of that, and you need to do things in a way that is sustainable, you know, to day-to-day life. Obviously, you do, and you do as much as you can. So obviously, the highest level is sort of you avoid killing people, you avoid killing animals, you avoid engaging in that. So you know, you can have a one, or you can have 20 zeros behind it, and that's the strength of your feeling, the strength, the engrossment, the engagement. And there's a difference between doing something reluctantly and doing something because you really want to do it. And with the point about the vehicles, the cars, the traveling, I think your aura, your whole feeling of peacefulness and what you do as much as you can, and it doesn't judge you on sort of not, you know, not doing this and that. It's more the principle rather than every action which may or may not be possible.
Exactly, which goes back to the the core point of, you know, really of what Gandhi was talking about, and there's a whole thing about exactly what you were speaking before. You're only what you project. You're only what you're putting out, and this is what I think's one of the most insightful things, and I think enlightening things about what you know, Jainism in what we talk about in general is that, like I say, it can happen in an instant. You can change your life, and you haven't got to go to some, you know, good path and go and beat yourself to an inch of life, or you got to go do some, you know, some ridiculous tasks and stuff. You can, like you say, you can affect your life and that starts from now. This is what I love about what you're saying, is because like you said, we all have the power not only to change the world around us, but that starts from changing inside yourself, and that it has really positive effects on your life, because this is the difference. And I think, you know, I can speak upon this, and you know, I mean that by by what you put out is what you know. It's like they would say in I told you before, you know, in the Bible terms, it's the old, you know, knock and you shall find sort of thing, and what you give out is what you will get back. That's the whole idea of karma. And this whole idea of, it's very it's simple for people to realize, but I don't think people won't put that into practice. But once they do put it into practice, they understand that that's all life is. The people that are you know, like you said, anxious and stuff like that, it's because they're living their lives full of lies and deceits, and they're having to jump on people and stamp on people to climb the corporate ladder, whatever it may be. But all this is, they're projecting this. No one's makers of their own existence. And it's like you said, this is getting down to the core of what, you know, what James stands for. Is getting that, strip it all away and get down to the core of what you are, and then you can change what you are. And this is the key principle. So you mentioned, sorry, we kind of gone down so many tangents. I really want to sort of focus on, you mentioned the you know, obviously the concept of what karma is, and the concept of jiva, what we are as selves and ourselves. What are the you mentioned there are a few other sort of main principles. What would you say the other main sort of tenets and that you talk about? We talked about karma and this body. What are the other main sort of, before we go on?
Just one thing to clarify a bit, just to avoid getting into trouble with the public there as well. I mean, one thing, I mean, I think one key principle within Jainism, which along with karma should probably highlight, I mean, this is something famous that Glenn Hoddle got in trouble with when he talked about disability. And I mean, I think one of the key things about Jainism is that no one has the right to judge anyone else, in the sense that whether someone is anxious, is disabled, and one of the things people have about karma is, then are you saying, are you insulting these people? And one of the key things about Jainism, there's four key aspects. I don't know if you like my singing earlier, but if you have a minute, I can say a couple of stanzas from this and describe it, because it kind of gets to the heart of this problem and how Jainism provides an answer for it, this
Perfect.
dilemma. So Maitri bhavano pavitra zarano मुझ हैया मावैया करे करे उपेक्षाए मागनी तो ये सम्मता चित्त धरो दीनहीन ने धर्म विहोणा देखी दिल में दर्द रहे करुणा भीनी आँखों माथी अश्रु नो शुभ स्तोत्र वहे. I messed it up a bit. I said the lines back to front, but the principle essentially is four. One is friendship to all, and in that, in terms of being non-judgmental, the principle is that we're all we might be up and down in the path of life, but we're all the same. We're all equal. Our souls are all the
Mhm.
same,
Mhm.
and whether someone's at the top of a roller coaster at one stage or the bottom of a roller coaster, how a pauper becomes a king and a king becomes a pauper in an instant. In the same way, people's luck can change and does change in an instant, according to what things are. And while someone may be um, harmed in a certain way, um, whether mentally or physically, that could that is only one aspect of the life you're looking at. And the
Mhm.
concept of anekantavada or multiplicity says no one has the right to judge anybody else.
Mhm.
And in that way, what you mentioned about James being really peaceful, and that's one of the core things, that your practice and what you do is for yourself, to judge yourself, but it should never give you the right to criticize or judge others, or say I'm doing this so I'm better than you, or you need to do this. Or it's more, you criticize yourself to improve yourself and to provide that solace to yourself that you've got ownership. But the flip side of that is the negative press it sometimes gets is because people don't quite understand the philosophy, and they apply it on the flip side as well. But the philosophy doesn't apply on the flip side strictly, because then that leads to being judgmental, and judgmental is a form of mentally harming others,
Mhm. Mhm.
and in the end will lead to your own downfall in a form of self-righteousness, which true spirituality with true spirituality that should be avoided. And sometimes, that's where religion in itself sometimes gets a bad name, not because of spirituality and religion in and of itself, but because of the imperfections of its followers. And I thought that was just a good point to get across. That was one, and the other was just an analogy I thought of with regards to the uh, harming of all life and having that in principle. The analogy on that, if you have an exam, then you got 100 questions, then you might not answer all 100. You might not get all 100 questions right. That doesn't mean in principle you'd only answer 90 questions and say I'm going to stop at the remaining 10,
Mhm.
because then your only maximum mark is going to be 90%. In the same way, as a principle, as philosophy, you'd aim for the highest. That doesn't mean you're absolute in saying it understands your limitations, but what you can aim for in principle is is still the highest. And then obviously you may not get 100%, but at least you've answered all the questions and you've tried your best to get 100%. So that's just an analogy on the principle of non-violence and how far you can take it in principle.
Exactly, and that's why I kind of earlier on I mentioned, I mentioned the lyrics from that song. Life is nothing but a carousel. You better, grab it, hold it fast, and grab it well, because that's exactly it. Because it's, it, I've seen this all around it's a reflection, and it's true. That's what I said before. It's a whole point whether you're a butterfly, and I mean, you'll see. I love ants. I've got a fascination. I always have. Ants to me, it's just been a lifetime fascination, and that's life. And life is life is life is life. That's why I call life. That's the point. None of us are. We're just experiencing it, and that's one of the truths that's lost in this whole world, where people, like you say, they want to up their status and think they're better than someone else, or they go on a down depression and they think they're lower than somebody else. No, it's just we're just here, and if you have that fortune enough to experience it, to reach out and find out a life and you're just surrounded by, that's all you should see it from. And I think that's what I love most about the core, like you say, the core tenet and core philosophy, what you're speaking upon, because that's so relevant in the times we live in. If people could just, there's an old Bill Hicks line, just stop taking themselves so seriously. The world would be a better place if everyone just stopped taking themselves so seriously and just chilled out a bit. And you know what I mean? Look, but one of the, that's great. So I think we kind of roughly covered, really, really, in a very, very, very broad stroke what Jainism is. And there's two things I really wanted to sort of cover to you before we do wrap this first conversation up. First, the second one I really wanted to get to you is your tell me about Young Jains. Now, people can go and read up, and we'll put links up to people in the show notes and stuff like this. But first sort of step to you, where did your interest with Young Jains begin? And give us a brief overview of what Young Jains is and what Young Jains does.
So, Young Jains is a organization essentially in the Western world, and it's a non-sectarian Jain organization. So it aims to take the core principles of Jainism and promote them amongst, I think it's not so much about converting, because Jainism's never been about converting, but making it available to those who may want to understand it, whether from the Western world, but also there's a lot of Jains, born Jains in the Western world, who now being third, fourth generation, haven't had the chance to. Sometimes you may be born with some of the greatest treasures but never realize it, and sometimes people may not know it in its true light, and one of the roles is just to increase awareness, if you like, and through mediums such as this, but many others, and that's essentially what Young Jains is. And the non-sectarian part is, in a sense, just as within Christianity, you have, Catholicism, you have Protestantism, you have Church of England, you have Quakers. There are a few minor variations between Jain sects, but essentially the core principles are there, and our aim is to together you're stronger. So already being a small community, it's good to just have an organization that represents Jains as a whole, and that's our aim. Particularly, although it's Young Jains, I don't know. I'm not that young now. It depends. So it depends how you look at it, but it's young at heart as well as young. But that's essentially there. That our focus is a bit on the youth, but the youth can be up to 80, 90, depending. But that's Young Jains.
But we were saying before we went live that you were telling me how this isn't only just in the UK, which I mean, again, before you sort of like step away from the UK a bit, that there's obviously kind of places you were saying, obviously around London and Leicester, and that's kind of more concentrations, whereas you go to where I am in the Highlands of Scotland, there's not a great kind of concentration of Young Jains up here, my friend. But you did sort of mention, and again, this is stuff that made me please expound more upon. You were saying that there's obviously Young Jains in New York and in Australia and that. So tell us about how kind of, because I was mentioning beforehand that obviously in India, and I was asking about how much reach out it had in America. So again, maybe people listening share about where, 'cause you mentioned New York and Australia, but just sort of tell us about the extended network. And obviously the same kind of bleeds into the next sort of the point really, is if any of those people living around there, maybe in New York or London and stuff, how can they reach out to those people? But the first sort of question, but just tell us how widespread the Young Jains are just on the world.
So I think so. There are Young Jains in America. I think more than Young Jains, I'd probably take it as Jain organizations, because
Hmm.
while obviously I'm a trustee within Young Jains, I think there's a lot of organizations that do a lot of good work within the Jains, and we all try to work together. In other countries, certainly, there is, I know for sure there's a Young Jains America, for example, but there's also a lot of Jain communities, a lot of temples, a lot of organizations, and in Australia, and in Africa, in Nairobi, um, and they all do a great work. And I'd say if anyone wanted to, where they live, find out, it can be difficult to find individual. Probably the best way would be either if through yourself someone wanted to find out, or um, we can just have created an email just if there are any specific questions, jainism1@outlook.com. Just created that, so if anyone wanted any contact near where they are, it may take a while to respond, but we can certainly help to try and put people in touch with someone we may know near them if they're interested. And there's a lot of literature, in quite simple language out there, if anyone was ever interested and wanted to find out more. It's not something we'd ever actively push on people, but it's there if people want to, essentially.
Okay, well, this kind of leads into like I said, the sort of the point generally. I mean, before we sort of stray away from this area too much, I mean, for anybody listening out there and just generally, and is there any particular area that you would, for people listening or out there that they could think, okay, how can I get involved? But maybe I don't live anywhere near these centres, but I want to get involved somehow. And just maybe not even in a social way. Maybe they're very quiet people. Is there any other ways other than that they can get involved in, or is there anything particularly that you're looking to, any sort of particular causes, or right now that you're particularly people could get involved in to just to help along?
I think the easiest way, because obviously people watching are from far reaches, if someone just wanted to find out a bit more, then probably through yourself and through the email I provide, I'm more than happy to um, find some simple literature that's difficult to find on the internet. A lot of these things, they come from specialist sources, through saints, through other sort of avenues, which obviously I've got a whole wealth of this sort of stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that if someone made the specific request, be happy to share. So if anyone wanted to contact you for that, then be happy to share knowledge and share resources. I think that's an easy way, because email is very easy, and then based on that, if they wanted to then pursue that more, then obviously we could find out who and what is near them wherever they are.
Oh, perfect. And this obviously leads to, well, if anyone is living in, for instance, London. So tell us about the Jain's Temple in London, and the potted history of that, and what your plans and what's sort of just generally where it is, and tell me all about it.
Yeah, so there's a few Jain temples around in London. There's a really nice temple in Potter's Bar, that's beautiful, and there's one in Kent, unless there's plans for a huge temple complex centre in Colindale, Jain Centre in Colindale, which will even have as a separate a vegetarian vegan restaurant, and um, a huge project, that multi-faith library, and that's going to be amazing once it's built. That's still in the process of getting built. But so I look forward to that. And there's an active center there where they have a small temple at the moment, but there's a community there. Potter's Bar is lovely, and at the moment, where all the ones are constructed, that's quite breathtaking. At the moment, it's a proper, like you'd find in India almost. I think as of this time, that's one of the most lovely ones, and I think once the Colindale one is built, that'll be amazing. And Kenton is one that's local to a lot of Jains, but we have, we have wonderful resources that are there, and an amazing one which is yet to be built. But we're in the process of trying to help that happen. Young Jains is supporting all of that as well. We've just supported the Colindale one, and we'll continue to do so.
So obviously, I mean, kind of really, like we've been discussing this whole conversation, there is no, that's what I'm saying. The thing of what we've been saying, there is no middleman, there's no sect to this, there's no kind of, so the point I'm trying to make, anybody in essence, if they're anywhere near any of these temples particularly, they can just walk in, and at any point, if it's open, I'm sure they're going to be given an open welcome. There's no kind of like you have to wear certain dresses or no certain secret knocks or any of that stuff. It's just an open door, because that's the reflection I've always had when like I say, when I went to India, it was just completely open welcome, and usually I was given I was actually offered food every time I ever went anywhere near a Jain. I've always been offered food, so I don't know if that's the same but I'm sure it's the same in London, though.
Yeah, I think one of the principles is that friendship to all, if you like, and that I think that's something, if you're truly practicing Jainism, then someone should be able to tell from your actions and what you are and what you're doing that you're a Jain, because a true Jain should have good thoughts and vibes about them, peace within, which will reflect peace in their environment. And that's difficult to live up to always, but that's the 100% exam aim that one should have as a Jain.
Well, Mukul, it's been absolute insightful conversation tonight. And before we do sort of wrap this up, maybe in one paragraph or one sentence, just maybe for anybody's listening, what would be the one thought you want to leave people maybe that wraps this whole conversation up with?
We talked a bit about the mind earlier, and a nice little quote I read a bit earlier today is that one may conquer the whole world, may get so much status, power, wealth, anything they dream of, but even so, the greatest achievement and the most difficult is to conquer the world within and to conquer the mind. And one may struggle to do that despite any external achievement. And that's not only the most difficult achievement, but also the inner victory and the inner world. Conquering that will give you the most happiness, according to Jainism. And I think that's quite a powerful notion and powerful slant on our aims and ambitions in life, and how that can sometimes be twisted upon itself.
Well, perfect. As I said, it's been a really insightful conversation. I know it's the first of many, and we can sort of say we're going to try to make this a once a month conversation. And it's a shout out really to anybody listening out there. Feel free to either send, as you said, the email at the address given, or me, or whatever. And feel free to ask questions, because I think that's one of the greatest things in life, that we've got the ability to ask questions. Now, before we do wrap this up, I don't know, and I'll hand this over to you. Is there a prayer or a song you'd like to finish on, or if not, I'm happy just to wrap this up. But I feel like this for the synergy of the whole thing, man. You have one at the beginning, one in the middle. It just seems almost the perfect way to end the whole conversation.
I can end on a song if people.
Perfect.
Yeah, fine. Okay. I'll just say our main prayer to end with, and then we can close. Okay.
Excellent.
Namore Antanam Namo Sedhanam Namo Ayari Anam Namo Vanza Anam Namo Loye Sab Sahunam Eso Panchanam Karo Saga Pavapana Sano Mangalancha Sarvesim Adhamam Avimam Ganam Sarvamangalamangayam Sarvakalyanakaranam Pradhanam Sarvadharmanam Jainam Jayati Shasam. All right, thank you.